Okay, so today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in March. It's been a while since I've done a reading vlog, partly because my reading habits have been not the best as of late, but since getting a proper full-time job and not having to work shifts in the evenings anymore, I'm finally finding the time to read more, to make more videos, and so the reading vlogs are definitely going to be coming back regularly once a month. The first two books on our list are both books from Jane Austen. One I finished this month and one I'm just beginning this month, but I can say of both of them that they are absolutely amazing. I decided actually that I'm going to try and read all of the Jane Austen novels in order, and so I begun with the first one, Sense and Sensibility, and now I'm pushing on with Pride and Prejudice. Let's start with Sense and Sensibility. So this is a wonderful story of two sisters, Marianne and Eleanor, who basically represent the two sides or two themes of the title. Eleanor is sensible, she's a bit more demure, she's a bit more rational, and she represents sense, and Marianne is a bit more in touch with her emotions and feelings, and so she represents sensibility. And the story basically explores how these two sisters navigate the world, and in particular their relationships with others and with men, and how someone deals with this who has sense, like Eleanor, and how someone deals with this who doesn't have as much sense and is more on the sensibility side, like Marianne. I really enjoyed the book. I like the kind of idea of exploring these two themes through these two characters, although I will say that one thing that I think held me back with the story is that I felt like Marianne and Eleanor weren't the best of protagonists. I think they have a very good relationship with each other. You know, they have a close sisterly relationship, but they're also a bit catty towards each other at times, which is quite fun. But I found that the thing that really sparked with this book were the secondary characters. Whether it's their snobbish sister-in-law, I forget what she's called now, Mrs. John, obviously named after the brother that she's married. And there's a great scene at the beginning where Mrs. John is telling her husband, Marianne and Eleanor's brother, half-brother, that he shouldn't help them out financially because they're only half sisters, and you know, it's barely a real relation, and she's a real snob and not a very nice person, but she's just one of those characters who you love to hate. And there are quite a few of these kind of larger than life snobbish types in this book that I really enjoy reading. I also like Mrs. Jennings, who is like a chatty friend to the girls, but she's also a bit of a gossip and she can sometimes get in their way a bit. She was also a fun character. And I also really like the character of Willoughby, who is one of the love interests for Marianne. I think he was a very complex character. I think it would have been quite easy to present him because he's not the best lover in the world, shall we say. He basically makes a choice between Marianne and money, and he chooses the money. And it would have been quite easy to have just portrayed him as a simple kind of charlatan, but actually Austen gets this really nice character development with him, where he does actually care about the fact that he passes Marianne over to marry someone with more money. But then also at the end you get this thought that maybe he would have just been unsatisfied if he'd have chosen love and not money. He's just that kind of person that can't settle down with any of the choices that he makes. So I thought he was a really cool character as well. Another thing that I really like, and this applies even more to Pride and Prejudice, but I love the way that Austen writes. It's just so modern and easy to read, which I just wasn't expecting. I mean, she was writing in the late 1700s, early 1800s, I believe, and her books just don't have that staleness to it. I was talking to a friend about this, and we were talking about the difference between her writing and kind of more Victorian style writing like Dickens, where, I love Dickens, I think he's great, but it is a much stodgier style of writing and can be quite hard to read, whereas Austen just doesn't have that. There's just a great wit to her writing. It's very crisp, it's very clear and very modern, and it's no surprise to me that she's lasted as long as she has, and why she's still so enamored by modern readers as well, because really she does have a modern sensibility in her writing, which is fantastic. Also then, Pride and Prejudice. So I'm not very far into Pride and Prejudice currently. I'm at the bit now where one of the sisters, Jane I believe she's called, she gets sick while she's staying at her love interest's house, and Elizabeth, the sassy protagonist, decides she's going to go walk to the house in the rain to see her sister, and of course this caused shocks to most of the people at the house, because ladies walking around in the rain is such a controversial thing in the time, and so we're just at that bit of the book, so it's quite early on, but wow, I mean, I like Sense and Sensibility, but this book is just even better. I mean, the fact that Austen is able to just advance so much in her writing in such a short period of time is just really impressive. It's such a snappy novel. Everything is just clear and crisp, even more so than with Sense and Sensibility. Pride and Prejudice just has really sharp dialogue, really sharp prose, all of the characters come to life and they're really distinctive. And I'm not even that far into the story yet, and I'm already in love with these characters. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where it goes and where this relationship between Darcy and Elizabeth and how it develops. I think it's fantastic stuff, and I'll definitely be talking about this more on the channel once I'm done with it. So yeah, Jane Austen, so far, fantastic. I'm really hoping that this keeps up and that I will enjoy reading the rest of her books as much as I'm enjoying the first two. Next up we have the Marquis de Sade with Philosophy in the Bedroom. It's been a year since I read Juliet, and so I thought I would carry on with another Sade novel. This one much shorter, thank God. It's not 1,200 pages. I think it's around 200 pages. It's reasonably short, and this one is quite interesting. So it's not really a novel, it's actually a sort of parody of a philosophical dialogue. So it's written like a kind of script, and it has philosophical musings that treat Sade's, usual suspects like religion, God, libertinism, morality, all these things, and obviously he's against against morals, in favour of liberty and all the rest of it. And the kind of conceit of the dialogue is there is a young woman who's in a relationship with a slightly older woman, and the slightly older woman is bringing this young woman to a friend or a guy, and that together they're going to kind of initiate her into the world of libertinism. And so the kind of book moves between this kind of plot and the various acts that are involved, which, to be fair, for Sade are quite tame, which isn't saying much because they're still quite extreme, but, in comparison to some of the other books, quite tame. It goes from that to these philosophical ramblings, and it's a very interesting, just funny parody of kind of traditional philosophical dialogues, and I really did enjoy it. What I also like about Philosophy in the Bedroom, and I think I would recommend it probably as a very good place to start with Sade, is that of all of his works that I've read, it's the most concise, and it captures basically everything that he is about, without kind of being too repetitive. He has all of his usual suspects, but he doesn't go on and on and on about the same topic. He kind of has that topic, moves on to the next one, moves on to the next one. He covers everything much more concisely than he does in, say, Juliet, which has, about 50 rants about God rather than just the one. So if you've not read any Sade, I would definitely recommend Philosophy in the Bedroom. It's also a little bit tamer, which, like I said, not saying much, but, not a bad place of entry, and it's quite entertaining as well. Also, a fun story, I actually found a film version of this on YouTube, of all places, which was surprisingly faithful to the original, although I think it was set in the 80s rather than obviously in Sade's time, which was an interesting switch, but it didn't really make much of a difference, and in a way it's sort of, even though it was like in terms of the aesthetics, it wasn't set in that past time, it still kind of felt like it because the dialogue was kind of very similar to the dialogue that Sade uses. So yeah, it was an interesting film and surprisingly tasteful in terms of obviously the things that happen in the book happen, but you didn't really see much, which I think was a good option, because I think if you're going to do Sade in a film, probably less is more is the right way to go. You don't want to see that stuff. But yeah, it was an interesting film, kind of poorly acted, but in a fun kind of way. And if you've got the stomach for it, I would maybe recommend giving it a go. Next up, we have another raunchy book, although less so than Sade. We have Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. D.H. Lawrence is definitely becoming one of my favourite novelists, along with Jane Austen. In fact, this month has just been really good for reading fantastic books. There's been nothing that I've really disliked. Well, actually, we'll get onto a couple that I maybe am less positive about, but in general, it's been quite a good month. But yeah, so I read Sons and Lovers, and I have reviewed that on the channel, and I'm absolutely blown away by that novel. I think it's just a fantastic story. Lady Chatterley's Lover is a story of Lady Chatterley, and she is a noble woman. She's married to a man who lost his legs in the war, and therefore is incapable of performing in the bedroom. And so they have this kind of arrangement where she's allowed to see other men to satisfy her needs. And the story centers around her relationship with sexuality, but specifically with the groundskeeper of the land that she lives on. And it kind of is a very explicit novel, and I knew going into it that this novel caused a sensation in its time, but I actually thought that, what caused a sensation in 1925 probably is quite different from what would cause a sensation now. And although Lady Chatterley's Lover, it's not explicit by today's standards, it's explicit in the same kind of way that today's stuff is. It's just, 100 years old. So that kind of impressed me. I wasn't expecting it to be as explicit and as detailed as it was. Not to say that it was like trashy. I think there's a lot of substance to this novel. There's also some interesting stuff about industrialization and the fact that England is kind of losing, kind of moving away from this kind of gentrified country of lords and ladies and all that, and moving into the more industrial age. So some interesting stuff going on there. And also that's kind of symbolized in terms of the kind of two men in the story. You have the impotent lord who can't get it up, and then you have the very rugged and very virile groundskeeper, and Lady Chatterley moving towards the groundskeeper, kind of representing those broader themes of industrialization and the kind of shift of power dynamic, which is quite cool and interesting. But yeah, a great story with a lot of depth. I would say though that I maybe don't prefer it as much to Sons and Lovers, because I think Sons and Lovers just has this huge scope. It touches on this big family drama, and it doesn't focus, although sexuality is a part of it, it's not too much ingrained in it. And Lady Chatterley's Lover is definitely more about the sexual stuff. But still, a 5-star novel. I really enjoyed reading it, and I just actually finished it this morning. So yeah, definitely one that I'll be talking about on the channel very soon, and probably one of my favourites of the year. Next up we have Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut. So Kurt Vonnegut is a novelist that I've kind of had mixed feelings about, shall we say. I first read his stuff as part of a reading club, and it was Welcome to the Monkey House, the short story, along with other short stories of his. And then in a different book club, someone picked Slaughterhouse-5, and I listened to the audiobook, and to this day I can't decide if it was the audiobook or the novelist that I was annoyed by. In Slaughterhouse-5, I don't know what it was. I think it might have been the writing style. I don't know. It didn't wow me. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. Nevertheless, I wanted to give Vonnegut another chance because one of my friends is quite a big fan of his, and I don't know if it's his favourite novelist, but he's certainly up there. And we talked about Mother Night before, and I thought, ooh, that's an interesting concept. Essentially, it's a story of a ex-Nazi propagandist and playwright who begins the story in jail for the war crimes, and he's basically writing his memoirs that kind of give you insights into why he did what he did, and he also at some point turns a spy for the US, so he kind of goes back on his Nazism, which I just thought was an interesting kind of story. So I thought I'll give Vonnegut another try, and I'm glad that I did, because I thought this was a really interesting book. Especially what I like about it is that the protagonist, he basically, like I say, he was a playwright, and he becomes a Nazi just because all of the people that, the kind of high-flying society that he was around, they were all Nazis, and so he just kind of falls into it in the way that, if you're just around people, you just sort of sometimes apathetically fall into what they're doing, and sometimes you don't even realise it or don't even think about it. And he's sort of more concerned with his relationship with his lover Helga than he is with, say, politics and those things. So it's kind of like that banality of evil idea coming, playing a part in the story. He doesn't become a Nazi because he's evil and just wants to do evil things. He does it because that's just what the thing was. And so I think that's a really interesting thing to explore. And Vonnegut explores it really well, and I really don't have any complaints with this story. I think it's a really cool concept. I think it's executed really well. Vonnegut's kind of humour shines through the whole story. And although it is, it's quite a dark story in terms of its content and its conclusion, but there's just something about Vonnegut that even when he's at his most depressing, he's always able to find humour and lightness in his writing style, in the little jokes that he makes. And so it's a really nice kind of dichotomy of dark content, but then this sort of, I don't want to say happy prose, but a sort of, just a certain kind of wit and charm to his writing style that makes you smile even when you're seeing some pretty terrible things happen. So yeah, a great book, and definitely my favourite of Vonnegut's novels that I've read so far. And I'll definitely be pushing on with him because I've kind of, he's kind of reinvigorated my faith in him with this book. And concluding our reading for this month, we have the final 2 novels of V.C. Andrews' Dollanganger series, Seeds of Yesterday and Garden of Shadows. So Seeds of Yesterday is the last novel that V.C. Andrews wrote because she sadly died of cancer soon after the publication of this book, I believe. And it basically concludes the story of the Dollanganger children, the living ones anyway. The Dollanganger family is a family saga of tragedy and drama and oftentimes ridiculousness. It kind of begins in the first novel with the 4 children, because there are 4 that are living at that point, and they lose their father in a tragic accident, and then the mother decides that they're going to go to her parents, who are very rich and well off, but they've disinherited her. She wants to go back to win back their love so she can get the inheritance. But she has to keep the children a secret, and so they get locked in the attic. And they stay there for about 3.5 years, and their mother decides to poison them with donuts. And then things get worse from there. In the final book, 2 of the Dollanganger children have died. 2 of them are remaining, and they have, Kathy has 2 children, and she's in a relationship with her brother, and they kind of raise the children. One of them, Bart, is a kind of religious fanatic who hates his mother for being in a relationship with her brother. And the story kind of revolves around this family drama and insanity. I actually quite like the Dollanganger series. I think it's trashy, but it's kind of fun. And some, V.C. Andrews has a very interesting writing style that is just so unique, even if it's not the best and most polished writing style in the world. You just got to give her credit for it, in my view. But I did find that with this last book, she was kind of retreading too much. Flowers in the Attic, I think, is a pretty good book and worth reading. The next one is a bit too far-fetched and ridiculous. I quite like the third one. It's kind of interesting, exploring her relationship with her children. But basically, the last book just recycles the plot of the previous book. In the previous book, you have the younger son, Bart, turning against his mother and being kind of manipulated by a religious fanatic. This story also has the exact same plot with a new religious fanatic kind of pulling the strings behind Bart. So it's literally the same story from the previous one. And then the end of the story is just so anticlimactic, because throughout the whole story you have this religious guy manipulating things and causing trouble behind the scenes. You're led to believe this is going to go somewhere, but then, spoilers, sorry, but Chris, the guy, the father-ish, dies in a car crash that's completely random, and then everything else just, everything's happy. Evil religious man just vanishes, the mother and sons forgive each other, and they all live happily ever after. Except for Kathy, who then, after losing her lover, goes up to the attic one last time, where she dies of heartbreak, which actually, even though it's kind of ridiculous to say it, is quite a touching scene and quite well written. But yeah, the story in this one, it just recycles the same story from the previous one, and so for that reason I can't say it's really worth reading except for completionist sake. But then you have Garden of Shadows, which is the next one, which is actually a prequel story which tells the story of the Dollanganger children's grandmother, who is the one who locked them in the attic and is also a religious crazy fanatic and a terrible human being. And I actually quite liked this prequel. It was written by a ghostwriter, and his writing style, I would say, is more competent than V.C. Andrews in terms of it's a bit more polished, but I would say it kind of loses that V.C. Andrews charm a little bit, which it is a bit of a knock on the book, I would say. But I like it. It's an interesting story, and it tries to explain where the grandmother is coming from, kind of explain her background and how she became the monster that she became. My only issue with it is that I think it doesn't do enough to motivate how terrible she ends up. I think it goes too far in the way of humanizing her, to the point where you're not really convinced that by the way she, the way she acts in the first book makes sense. Because it seems to me that, in order for that to work, you really need to have a moment where she really breaks and she becomes full on just terrible. Whereas that doesn't really happen in the books. She actually has a very good relationship with her daughter and her husband, who also is related to her. And then obviously the revelation occurs that the siblings are sleeping together, and so she boots them out and they're disinherited. And then they come back, and because she's basically found God in the interim, that's enough to just make her completely crazy. And I don't know, I just didn't buy it. So yeah, I think I do like the story. I think it's quite interesting and quite cool. But I think more needed to be done to really motivate the grandmother as someone who is fundamentally, changed and become a terrible human being. But that didn't quite happen. So yeah, worth reading. And what I do like about it is that it ends with the grandmother locking the Dollanganger children in the attic, so it literally brings you full circle to the beginning of the story, which is quite cool. I think if you're going to tell a prequel story, kind of ending at just the moment before the original kind of series began is quite cool, because it just sends this kind of circularity to things, which is quite aesthetically pleasing, shall we say. But yeah, I would say that was one of my favourites in the series, actually. But yeah, the last one, not so much. Alright, that's it for this reading vlog. Let me know what you've read this month. Have you read any classics? Have you read any trashy novels? Have you read any gothic horror, any fantasy? What are you reading? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for updates for new videos. Take care everyone. Ta-ra!